own training.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Welcome to Coach's Q&A. Right, let's try and get Corinne on. We've got Corinne is waiting on the hotline, on the hot seat. Now let's see if we can get her on. We've had technical problems this end, as always, but let's see how we get on. So if I hit that button, is it going to work? No, that's me. So I'm going to add Corinne on one side. I'm going to add me on the other side. Oh, now it's two of me. I'm going to get rid of me on that side. I'm going to change that to me. There we go. Oh no, it's gone back to Corinne. There we go. There we go. We're all good now. We're all in. We're all in. Can you see that? Are you watching the thing?
Can I see it? I can't see it. It's not come up on my YouTube for some reason, so I'm just changing.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's because of my internet, but anyway, I'm here. Hello.
Okay. Shall we do our introductions then? I'm Dave Knight. I'm the head coach, Do 3. This is our weekly coaches Q&A where we get people to fire random questions at us and we answer them as best we can. And you can either, well, a few people have sent us through some questions beforehand, so we've got some questions to start us off. But if you're watching and you have any questions and you'd like to ask them live, then just type them into the YouTube box or into the Facebook box or Twitter or wherever you happen to be, and it should find its way through to us and it'll pop up on my screen here. Also, if you've got any comments or you just want to say hi, that's all good too. So just feel free to make a comment. If it's nice, we'll read it out. If it's not so nice, we won't. So that's me. Corinne, do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Corinne. I work with Dave at Do 3 as a coach and general dog's body.
I don't know. Is that a step up from coffee shop hunter, or is that general dog body? That's a bit of a step down. I think you're kind of doing yourself a little bit. Well, you're not answering that, so obviously think it has gone down. Okay, all right.
Been demoted.
All right. So shall we start then? I've got a question from Pat Polton. Let's see if we can pop this on the screen, see if this works. There you go. So a question from Pat, question for Q&A. Some advice about cycling when it's really windy, please. That's an interesting one. Yeah, it has been really windy the last couple of days, hasn't it? Unusually so for this time of year. Where do we start with this one then? So first of all, yeah, you can get blown about quite a bit and it can be quite unnerving. And I guess there's a few ways to look at this. There's the confidence side of it and the ability and the kind of practicing in the wind, and then there's the physical, what you can do to yourself and your bike to stop yourself getting blown about, for want of a better way of putting it. So let's start with the kit first of all. It's probably the easiest place to start. So obvious as it may sound, the bigger you make yourself and the more kind of surface area your bike has, then the more you're going to feel the wind. And again, this may sound like common sense, but some people may not consider it. Think about things like your clothing that you're wearing. So clearly big flappy tops and big flappy jumpers and jackets and things like that are going to catch the wind. Hence why, or one of the reasons why cycling gear is normally pretty figure hugging. It doesn't flap about all over the place. So make sure that you wear your tight fitting gear so you're not catching the wind. In terms of the bike itself, then, obviously you're going to be, or a lot of people are going to be restricted by the type of bike that they ride. Clearly, some bikes, talking about the frame itself specifically, have kind of deeper sections than others. So some of them are little kind of round tubes on the kind of actual frame, and some of them more like aero road bikes or TT bikes have got bigger, thicker kind of cross section areas to them. So they're going to catch the wind. So if you have a choice in terms of bike frames, and you are particularly worried, particularly when you're getting used to riding in the wind, then obviously opt for a type of frame which is going to catch the wind a little bit less than it would do otherwise. if you don't have a choice, you've only got one bike, or what's one thing you do need to consider is if you're going to be racing in windy conditions, and you do actually need to get used to riding in the wind anyway, then you need to go out and get used to the conditions on whatever bike you have. So let's just park that there for a second. The next thing you want to think about is your wheel choice. Now, obviously, same as the frame, really. The deeper the section wheels, you're going to catch more wind. You're going to catch the wind, depending on which kind of direction it's coming from, but you're going to catch the wind a little bit more. And it's always the front wheel which catches the wind more than the back wheel. So most people, you can get away with having a slightly deeper section wheel on the back, depending on how windy it is. But you can generally get away with having a deeper section wheel on the back. But it's the front wheel is the one which is going to catch the wind. All right. So if you are a little bit nervous in the wind, then that's the one you want to reduce the profile down of. All right. So if you do have a normal kind of a shallow section wheel, then obviously kind of go for that if you're a bit worried about the wind. And that's obviously controlling the front end of the bike. So that's the one which, if it catches a gust or something, is going to scare you. So just think about your frame choice and your wheel choice. So in terms of actual kit, I think that's kind of really it for now. The only other thing to think about really is the kind of course that you're riding or the route that you're taking. You can anticipate the wind. So as you get used to riding, you will obviously kind of have a feel for which direction the wind is blowing in. You can get sideways gusts and kind of random gusts coming around, things like that. But as you ride more, you can get used to kind of anticipating where the direction the wind is coming from. So, for example, if the wind is if it's a side wind and you're riding along a country lane, you can anticipate if you've got a gap in the hedge or there's an open gate or something like that, then you can anticipate when you're going to get a gust coming through the gaps. So, just having a bit of consciousness about what's around you in terms of the surroundings, where you're likely to catch the wind, obviously helps. And the only way you're going to get that is by practicing. And going out and getting used to it effectively. Now, I've ridden a lot in windy conditions, particularly used to go to Lanzarote quite a lot when I was riding a lot more, and it could get pretty damn windy over there, really, really windy. And I can remember a few times when I was a little bit less experienced and going over there and really being quite worried about particularly the descents, but also just kind of generally riding on the flats sometimes, because it can really get scary. And I can remember a few times the descents kind of back down into what's it called? Anyway, one of the Costa Teguise down into the resort towns. You go down a good fast downhill section where there's normally some good strong side winds and gusts coming across, and it can be scary. And I've been over there and had to change my wheels because it wasn't comfortable. But what happened over the weeks and over the ton of visits and things is you do get used to it. You do have to spend time out there and you do get used to it. So, to a degree, you do have to expose yourself to it and start getting used to handling it. Okay. I've been out on rides, particularly when it's side winds, where you're actually kind of riding along. You can almost be riding. I'm sure you've done this in the past, Corin. You're almost riding along at kind of 45 degrees. You're leaning into it, and there's been occasions where I've actually had problems the other way, where we'll go past a wall or we'll go past a palm tree, and the wind will stop for a split second. So rather than having a gust of wind in the gap, you'd have a section of no wind as you go past an object or something. So you do get used to it. So think about the kit that you're wearing. Think about obviously choosing your days. If you're a bit nervous about it, then go out. Don't go out when it's super windy, because it will scare the life out of you. You've got to build up that confidence. So go out when it's not too windy, and then start building up. There are days where I would advise don't ride. And there's been a few days over in Lanzarote where we just haven't ridden because it can just get ridiculous. You can get blown off the road. So you do have to be careful. Um, so I think that. Can you think of anything else, Corin? While I get some thinking time, see if I can think of anything else.
Um, did did you mention about road position and space on the road?
No. Yeah.
If you're riding in the wind, particularly if it's gusty or you're cycling somewhere where there are gaps in hedges for gates, and the wind, as Dave said, can you'll be protected from the wind by the hedge, and then you'll come up to a gateway and it'll suddenly throw you sideways. So just think about giving yourself a bit more space on the road, depending on which way the wind is coming from. If you've got a crosswind coming from your right, you don't want to be riding right in the gutter, because you'll end up being blown off the side of the road. So just consider that. And if you're riding with a group, again, try not to be too close to people if you're riding side by side, in case the gusts catch you. Be mindful of things like lorries and cars passing from either direction, and thinking about the fact that they will block the wind, as like the wall that Dave mentioned. They'll block the wind, and once they've gone past, they'll suddenly suck you out again into the road. So just hold firm on your handlebars, keep a really strong hold on your bike, ready for those gusts. What else? In terms of sort of riding position, find someone big to ride in front of you if you're riding in a headwind, and tuck yourself up nice and tight, elbows in, and kind of hunker down behind them, and you'll get some protection, and it will make a massive difference if you're riding behind someone into a headwind. But also do your turn on the front to give them a bit of a break. If you've got tailwind, use it, sit up, and use yourself as a bit more of a sail, and let it push you on, and give you a bit of a recovery from when you've ridden into the wind. I think
Yeah.
that's about it, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
But
can, if you've got a bit of a crosswind, you can, and riding with others, you can kind of ride to the side of them a little bit, to get a bit of protection, but try not to sort of overlap wheels. So if they get blown a bit sideways, they're going to catch your front wheel.
yeah, yeah, and that's effectively what an echelon, isn't it? Where you're riding, you might see the professional cyclists riding along the road, and they're in a line, kind of diagonal line across the road, because there'll be a wind coming from the direction of the way they're kind of riding in the diagonal, if that makes sense. So they'll be sheltering from each other across the road, and of course, if there's enough riders, eventually they'll run out of space at the curb, and then they're the ones that kind of look out and have to sit on the back and get a little bit more exposed. So just think about your riding position, and the obvious thing, which I think Corin just touched on there, is make yourself nice and small. I know you're quite small anyway, Pat, but make yourself nice and small. Particularly if it's a headwind, just try and reduce that surface area, because that ultimately that's what you're trying to do throughout all of this, is trying to reduce your exposure to the wind, and that can be making yourself as kind of small as possible. Um, so yeah, I think that's pretty much it. But I think the main thing, think about your kit. Make sure it's going to catch the wind as little as possible. The front wheel's the big one, so don't go out in the wind with big snazzy carbon wheels on the front, particularly if you're not comfortable with handling it. And think about, as Corin says, the positioning in the road, because you can get pushed a foot or two sideways, and you do have to anticipate what's coming up. So, but it can be scary. Don't be concerned about the fact, or embarrassed or whatever, about the fact that you find it worrying, because I can still almost remember the feeling now, because you can feel a bit. You think everyone else is comfortable with it, and everyone else is not worried, whereas most people are just as concerned as you would be, until they become much more experienced at it. Actually, I actually kind of enjoy riding in the wind now. I treat it as another challenge, and kind of you go out and treat it as and embrace it, and you can have some fun out there. So you get a bit of a tailwind, like I had the other day, and you feel like you're absolutely on fire. So make the most of the tailwinds. um, I think that's pretty much it. Corin, you got anything else?
No, not that one.
Okay. If anyone's watching and they've got anything else, any other kind of bits and bobs that we haven't picked up on, then feel free to pop it in the comments, and we'll fire it along the line to Pat. All right. So good luck with that, Pat. We'll see you. We'll see you out there flying past in the wind with a tailwind at some point, no doubt. So right. So next question then. Let's move on to Marcus. Let's pop this on here. Is this going to work if I do this, or is it going to make us come off the screen? Here we go. At Mossy, hope you're well. So Marcus is training for a full distance race. Assuming no injuries, having completed a couple of full distance races last year, what would be your direction in terms of, one, the longest run off the bike, and two, the longest standalone endurance run you would be aiming for in the lead up to full distance event, either in time, distance, or time on feet? Okay, so this is in fact, I'll leave that on there for now. This is one of these questions where it varies, and we do have to be careful. So I'm going to try and make this a bit bigger. I'll leave it there. So this is an individual, as most training questions actually turn out to be anyway. It's very much down to the individual. So, for example, a lighter weight runner and someone who's a more experienced runner, for example, may get away with more run training. It's as simple as that. If you're a bigger runner, a little bit more heavy on your feet, then you may have to do a little bit less training. So you do have to kind of listen to your body and adapt depending on the actual type of athlete. Marcus, actually, kind of obviously, I know you and I know your kind of build. I haven't seen you run that much. Saw you at Outlaw, didn't I? Outlaw half, or whichever one it was. I'd kind of say you're in the middle somewhere. You know, you're not a particularly big guy, but equally you're not a tiny little guy either. So you'd be in the middle somewhere. So the longest run off the bike, what do? We go up to 2 hours. We go up to 2 hours with the long distance training plan. So 2 hours off the bike and a 3 hour standalone run. 3 hour standalone run. So the way we do this, and this may, no, I was going to say it might relate to Howard's question, but no, it's slightly different. So when we move through our our long distance training block, we alternate between a long run 1 week. So, and that the duration of that run will build up across the weeks. And the following week, we'll do a brick. Okay, so we'll do a long ride and still a long run, but not as long as the standalone run off the bike. If that makes sense. So yeah, and I actually looked at this for somebody a couple of days ago. So we will do 6 hours on the bike, kind of at the peak. So, and this is the last ride before, or the last brick before the end of the block. So a 6 hour ride, so a long ride. It's a steady kind of zone 2, so it would be around about or zone 2 stroke kind of very low end of zone 3. So long distance race effort for some people may be able to do it in 5 hours or even a little bit quicker, the long distance ride. But we intentionally go over distance, or 6 hours will be over distance for a lot of people. So a slightly over distance ride and then a 2 hour run. So, and the idea really, the objective of this is to give you the run stimulus off the bike without completely crippling you and taking you out for a week afterwards, because these are big training sessions. So a 2 hour run off the bike is still a big run, especially off a 6 hour bike ride, but you need to get that volume in, you need to get that time on your feet in. So it is important that you do that. So at the peak, that's an 8 hour training day. Now, in order to increase the load further still, because that's still a long way off doing a full marathon off the bike, is on the Friday, say the brick is on a Sunday, on the Friday you will do a long run as well. All right, so you'll go into the weekend with the legs carrying some fatigue. It won't be a super long run. It would be maybe an hour to an hour and a half on the Friday. Then you have a fairly light Saturday, and then you go into your big brick on Sunday. So you go into your brick carrying a little bit of fatigue through, but then you do your 2 hour run off the bike. I hope that kind of makes sense there. And then the alternating weeks is when we have a pure long run. That's usually done on, I think it's usually done on a Saturday. I can't remember for sure. So that would be a long run, and that would take you up to 3 hours. All right, we don't go any longer than that, because the trade-off between getting the kind of adaptation and getting your body exposed to that kind of volume, is that it generates a lot of fatigue. It generates a lot of fatigue, and you'll effectively spend the rest of the week recovering, ready to do the long training session the following weekend again. So you have to be really careful with it, and all of this has to be tempered with, ideally, the athlete speaking to the coach in between and adjusting things on the fly. So you wouldn't ideally have, for example, an 8-week block where you just crack on through it regardless. You would speak to somebody, and it may well be that you're suffering a little bit more, so you dial it back in the week, or it may well be that the next weekend things are reduced down. Also, it may well be you're an individual who is actually pretty strong on the bike, so you can afford to actually dial the bike back a little bit and then increase the run. So it may well be there's a bit more of a run bias, but again, it depends on the individual athlete. So I think the answer is the longest run off the bike, yeah, the longest standalone endurance run, yeah, and so we've already spoken about the kind of the race focus, the actual long distance block, which is 8 weeks the way we program. So 8-week block, finishing around about 2 weeks out. 2 weeks out, and then we'd have, or again, it varies for various people, but we'd have a 2-week taper. We don't favour hugely long tapers. 2 weeks is normally enough for most people, and some people get even less than that. So that's the 8 weeks. And 2 weeks including the taper, so that's 10 weeks out from race day. But prior to that, you would have effectively a middle distance focus block. All right, so it would be taking you up and slowly taking you up to the levels where you can actually handle the big runs and rides that we're talking about. All right, so you wouldn't just parachute in at the kind of volumes that we're talking about. There'd be a progression all the way through. So I think you probably already know, Marcus, we work in 8-week blocks across all the different cycles, with a dial back week every 4th week, I think that's pretty much it. I hope that answers your question. I think I've missed anything there, Corinne. You think of anything else?
No, I think that's answered it.
Yeah. So. I mean, Marcus, if you're watching, then feel free to drop in. I think we're going to be speaking to you anyway shortly about your training and getting you on this this program. So we'll be in touch, Marcus. But I hope that's answered your question. I think it's maybe Pat's popped up. We got Facebook user rather than Pat's name. Thanks both. It's the crosswinds that I don't like, especially when you pass a gateway. Yeah, that can be scary, and sometimes obviously you can't anticipate because you can't see it coming. But yeah, it's just a case of getting out there and getting used to it. If you're in a country lane, for example, where it's the kind of environment where you are going to get open gates and things like that, if it's safe to do so, just stick yourself into a little bit further out into the road. Always get some flashing lights on the back of your bike. Anyway, I mean, I would advise that you put those on year round, because if you are going to be you want to be nice and visible at the back of the bike. So even during the daytime, if you want to be sitting a little bit further out on a windy day, then get some flashing lights on the back of your bike and wear some high vis gear so people can see you, and they're obviously aware that you're there. Right. So I think that's it. If anyone else is watching, you got any questions that you want to pop on the screen, then feel free. We've only got one more to do, Corinne. We have an early finish today. But didn't we say that last time, and then we ended up with about 25 questions suddenly?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. So next one's from Howard. Just started reading a book called. In fact, I'll put it on the screen. Let's put it on the screen, shall we? Let's put it on the screen. There we go. That looks a bit small, doesn't it? There we go. Just started a book called 80-20 Triathlon by Matt Fitzgerald. What are your thoughts on the 80-20 training principle, and does it influence Do3 training plans? Obviously, didn't see your workshop on the Do3 way. Simple answer to that question, Howard, is no. We know what the 80-20 kind of rule is, and roughly what it's all about. But I think a lot of these things are designed to simplify training for athletes. So it's a way of getting you to think about the type of training and the kind of volume and the ratios that you should be doing. Now, as a coach, we plan out our training sessions so that there's a good amount of rest in there and the right proportion of higher intensity work is done alongside the aerobic work. Now, what I've never done is actually gone out and worked out what the ratios are. In fact, what I was going to do actually is I'm going to bring up my little spreadsheet on here. Let's see if I can get this up on here. And I'm not going to go through it with you in fine detail, but I'm just going to give you an idea of the kind of ratios that. So when I say I don't work it out, I'm actually lying, because I kind of do work it out, but I don't pay a huge amount of attention to it because we're so well kind of drilled at doing this. So let's have a look at a middle distance block. So yeah, so total duration. We got one here, for example. So total duration for this particular week: 12 hours. 12 hours. Total swim 3 hours. Total bike 6 hours. Total run 2 hours. 2 hours 30. So we do break down the kind of the ratios across the three disciplines, and I've actually got total time at total time at intensity, and what I do with that is add together the intervals. So whether that be kind of a middle distance interval or a threshold interval or higher than that, then we'll add together that kind of what is considered to be the work kind of load. So that would be bike intensity 2 hours. 2 hours across the week. So that's about a third, isn't it? That's about 30% there on that particular week. So 6 hours bike, of which 2 hours of it is intensity, but some of that intensity is zone 3, so middle distance intensity. So actually moderate effort. So we do break it down. We do have a look at it. And I think when any coach plans their training, they should always be looking at how much workload there is. And when I say work, it's really zone 4 and above, so threshold and above, but also kind of having an eye on the zone 3 stuff, the kind of middle distance type effort as well. But apart from that, the bulk of your training is done in zone 1, zone 2, predominantly zone 2. So I guess in simple terms, we don't necessarily kind of look at 80-20 and kind of divide it up like that, but we do certainly have an eye on the kind of the rough distribution there. And again, with any of these things, because we're dealing with athletes and we're talking to athletes day in, day out, we adjust things appropriately. One thing we do say to athletes a lot is to kind of train. We do a lot of field-based stuff, but when we're doing zone-based training, is making sure that you're sticking to your zones because athletes more often than not go too hard. So if you're doing a steady aerobic interval, so zone 2, a long ride or a long run, then very often athletes will simply go too hard. And they end up in this kind of, you probably end up doing a lot of training at zone 3, which actually generates a fair amount of fatigue, but you don't kind of get if you're not doing it in a controlled way, it will generate too much fatigue and you won't get the return on that kind of training investment, if you like. So you either intentionally train zone 3 for a specific period of time, or zone 4, whatever it happens to be, or you train easy. So zone 2 should feel nice and doable, nice and steady. Don't let the zone 2 easier efforts creep up into zone 3, because it just generates so much fatigue. And I always say to people, you only train as hard as you need to. Never train any harder than you need to. Okay, so we're looking always trying to get the maximum return for the minimum effort. So, and a good way of looking at this is sweet spot training, where you are training at sub threshold, so a step back from threshold, but an intensity which you can sustain for a long time, or for a fairly long time anyway. It's like a speed endurance kind of effort. So that is kind of, we call it zone 4. So it's below threshold, sub-threshold. It's actually kind of on the bike a step back, quite a step back from actual threshold efforts. We spend a lot of time training in that zone because it's the kind of area where you can actually do quite a lot of training in that area and get a really good training effect, but it doesn't really give you that much fatigue. So we do a fair amount of controlled intervals at that level. Now, the reason I mention that is because if you were to push that up to threshold and you did those intervals at threshold, you'd have to work so much harder, and the balance would be tipped towards generating too much fatigue. So you're better off dialing it a little bit back, spending more time in that kind of zone 3 area than you are pushing on too hard. It's quite complicated. It's quite complicated because there's always times to train in these particular zones, but it's just making sure that you're not doing what everyone calls grey training, where you're just kind of training moderately hard all the time. I guess the easiest way to think about it is I remember Brett Sutton saying to me years ago, there's effectively 3 training zones. There's easy, a kind of threshold, or moderate, and hard. There's you don't need to make it any more complicated than that. 3 training zones. It's either an easy day, a kind of a threshold effort, or it's hard. Where you're going, not quite full gas, 95% effort. They're the 3 zones in simple terms that you need to stick to. It's when you start kind of drifting between them, when you start doing this grey training. So, and that doesn't kind of answer your question about 80-20. I think most people probably know me by now that I'm not really kind of one for jumping on bandwagons and things. So it's not something which I would do. I'd rather kind of learn and adjust training and coaching methods and methodologies based on what we've seen our athletes do and what their response to the exposure to the kind of training methods that we do. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Corin? Have I just waffled on there for 20 minutes without making any sense?
No, I think that's it. I mean, you've been in the time that I've worked with you over the last 5 years, you've adapted what my kind of training to fit what I respond to and what other athletes may respond to. So it has developed over time from what you used to do. In terms of sort of the proportions of different kinds of training, that depends on which block you're in, really, because in the sort of the speed and power kind of block, you're doing higher intensity for shorter periods and then longer recoveries in between. And then as you sort of approach race season, you're doing more sort of speed endurance work, which may be a bigger proportion at race intensity than sort of earlier on in your training. So it depends where you are in the season as to the proportions. In my experience of the way that Dave puts together the training plans, anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Corin. I was a bit worried there. So I'll tell you a fact. What I'll do, actually, let's see if I can just to prove that we don't make it all up. This is one particular training program or training plan that I'm going to get this to work. This is me. This is one of my, what people never see is me working out the training loads across the weeks. You can obviously see the overall load. So the red one is total bike, green total run, and then the purple and the blue is intensity. So you can see there's a constant progression. It really ramps up towards the end there on the bike because the long rides kind of creep in there. You can see the recovery weeks. So you can see how they're all planned out and kind of increase over time. So the running is a bit more erratic because we do big runs and then we have to recover, big runs, recover. We have to be really careful with the running because the running is the one side of things that will cause people problems. Most people can get away with swimming, get away with cycling pretty much as they like, but running is the one you've got to be super careful with. So I hope that I hope that answers your question, Howard. Maybe I should go and get the book and read it. But again, I'm kind of, yeah. Maybe that's a Christmas present, Corin. I tell you, I've got Joe
I'll
Friel's
write it down.
I've got Joe Friel's um, triathlon training manual in the bookcase upstairs, and I bought it, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. I think I've only opened it twice because, yeah, I don't know if it's arrogance or what, but I kind of felt like the knowledge that I had through working through the experience I've had through my own experience, also working with some of the fairly well known coaches around the world, has ended up with us in a kind of a good place in terms of how we train our athletes, and the results that we get kind of speak for themselves. So we wouldn't want to change it too much, because if it works, it works. But having said that, we always go through a review process. So if I pick up patterns and things that athletes that are happening, like we have little spates of athletes picking up knee aches and pains and things like that. It may well be that the kind of some of the strength work is just the balance is just a little bit out and things like that. So we do obviously make adjustments along the way. So the vast majority of the plans are tweaked and adjusted every year based on the response that we get from athletes. So it's a constantly moving feast, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's that. Right. Oh, Richard Simkis. Richard, I think we saw you out running the other day, actually. I'm sure it was you. Yeah. Oh, I'm hesitating and sighing because this is a big can of worms here. It's a big. Corin, do you want to take this one? Have you seen the question?
I can't see it.
Oh,
No.
that's convenient. All right. Okay. So Richard's question then: as someone with little experience of longer distance tries, completed one middle distance, can you tell me a little about low cadence cycling? I'm glad you said tell me a little about it, Richard. Otherwise, we'd be here all day with this one. Can you tell me a little about low cadence cycling and its benefit for Ironman long distance? Well, this is one for a whole kind of workshop. So at Do Three, there's no secret that we do favour the kind of the big gear style of riding and a lower cadence style of riding. So we've done numerous workshops on it, and it's the way that we coach people. A lot of our bike sessions are done at big gear, a lot of strength work. So I think the easiest way to explain this really is for you to go out. Rich, I'm telling you, this is a training session for you. I want you to find any old route really. Go for an hour's ride at your regular cadence. So say your regular cadence is 90 or something like that. Go out and ride it. If you've got a power meter, even better. Then go out and ride it at, I don't know, let's say, for argument's sake, Rich, I know you'd probably do 240 watts. So pick a wattage which is a solid but sustainable wattage, and ride for an hour, okay, at your cadence. Then come back and go back out and do this, or not the same day, but on a different day, same kind of conditions, so you can try and mimic it as best you can. Go out and do the same kind of ride at, I don't know, 70 to 75 cadence. And I say I don't know because cadence is very athlete specific as well. Some athletes will naturally favour a lower cadence than others. So it's very specific, and you'll generally find there'll be a cadence that you feel natural going to. And this is about let's go back. What you'll find is when you do the two rides, you'll be able to analyze the results you get. Okay. Now, hopefully, and this has been tested time and time again, and there's always an exception to the rule, but time and time again, you will find that the heart rate is lower, okay? Because in simple terms, the way of thinking of it is there's two kind of different ways of driving that bike forward. There's kind of like a cardiovascular base of it, and then there's the muscular side of it. So there's the heart and your lungs, and then there's the muscular side of it, your lungs, sorry, your legs and the muscles that are physically driving the pedals forward. So the way we approach this is that we are trying to protect the cardiovascular system for as much as possible through both the swim and the bike. So we're trying to keep the heart rate down as low as possible, because the one place you're going to need that cardiovascular system is during the most important leg of the triathlon, which is the run, because that is where the results are made and lost. So if you, and you see it time and time again, it goes all the way back to the swim. If you go into the swim and you train yourself, you're doing 3.8k and you train yourself every week, week in, week out to do 3.8k, and you go and do that on race day, and you're at the limit of what you can achieve, and you're probably going harder because you're stressed and you're obviously racing with others and that kind of thing. People's heart rates are through the roof. You get out of the water and your heart rate's already high when you get on the bike. You then pedal at 90 cadence all the way around for 112 miles. Then your heart rate, you're going to be burning so much gas that your cardiovascular system is going to be not in the best condition for when you get off and run. You're going to be eating, going through fuel at a rapid rate of knots. And effectively, you're not setting yourself up as best you can for the run. You save the cardiovascular system as best you can for the run. That's when you use your heart and your lungs, because that's when you're going to need it. And that's kind of the basis around the way that the kind of the methodology that we use in all of our training programs. Even the sprint training programs, sprint triathlons is still an endurance event. It still lasts an hour or so. So it's still an endurance event. But the cadence levels is a huge subject, because it varies between race distances as well. I mean, obviously you've mentioned here, I thought you said middle distance, but you didn't use Ironman and long distance. And so it really applies to you. It applies also to middle distance, and it applies slightly less so as you get shorter, because you do need to get the cadence up higher for the higher powers. All right, because you can't rely just on the strength of your muscles ploughing you through for a sprint try. You do need to get the cadence up if you're putting higher power numbers out. So this is really moderate and lower long distance power numbers that we're talking about here, or efforts, I should say, bike efforts. So I'm losing my train of thought a little bit there. So I think that in summary is why we're trying to do it. We're trying to protect the cardiovascular system. Now, because we are training, it's more of a strength way of riding, then you can't just parachute in and ride like that. So what you do find with new athletes and athletes who are new to this style of training is that they expect instant miracles. They expect instant results, and building strength takes time. You wouldn't go and do bench presses and expect to be able to do 100 kilos on the first day. It takes time to build this up. So very often our athletes will go through a development process of a year at least, maybe 2 years, before they start really seeing the benefits of this type of riding, this type of racing and training. I know, Corin, you've obviously been through this. You've been through the school now, if you like, for a good number of years now, and I think it's worked out pretty well for you. And we do. You can answer that in a second, but let me just finish this. We do have a reputation for, well, I like to think we do. Anyway, Corin, you can answer that as well. For making strong riders and people who can run well off the bike, because of the methods that we use. But you do have to be patient. It may well be, if you're riding at 90 cadence, 95 cadence, and I know that's what all the magazines say, and that's what you get taught to ride and all this kind of stuff. But I would give it a go. It's probably the best way to do it. So when you're out riding next, give it a go. Drop the cadence down to 70, 75 or thereabouts. Just see how it makes you feel. See what your heart rate does, and actually give it a run off the bike. See how it feels. That's the best way to test this stuff out. I went to San Moritz a good number of years ago, a few years ago now, and I went to do I was effectively being kind of a mentorship with Brett Sutton over in San Moritz in Switzerland, and all this was fairly new to me at the time, the big gear riding and the reasons behind it. And he said exactly the same thing to me: go out and test it. The first time I did a climb, I did it at probably 90 cadence. I've never been a super high cadence rider. Did it at 90 cadence. Did it a couple of days later, and the results are there to be seen. It was quicker with lower cadence. My heart rate was lower. I felt fresher. It was a win-win all the way across the board, and it kind of, once you've tested these things and you've seen the results, it really does kind of give you the confidence that you're doing the right thing. There's been other tests as well. GCN did a test themselves and had similar kind of results. And yeah, I can't. Is there anything else we need to go through with that, Corin? You've heard all this stuff before, haven't you? About a billion times.
Yeah, well, it does work, like you say. It shows in the results that we get, and that we have a reputation for building strong cyclists. So I ride at quite a low cadence with quite big gears for somebody my size, but over the years I've been training like that. I remember 5 years ago doing training sessions that had me spinning up to 120 RPM, which now I don't think I could even get to 100.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite used to riding low cadence, and naturally now I'll just sit at sort of 70-ish in a race, and that feels great for me, and I could ride all day like that. And yeah, so it certainly seems to work for me.
Yeah, and one thing I haven't mentioned also is the way. So this is kind of a big subject again. Is the way that you physically ride your bike. You wouldn't think there was more than one way of actually propelling a bike forward, but there is. And we promote a kind of a push-only style of riding. And again, it's a similar kind of concept to the big gear and keeping the heart rate down. What the push-only style of riding doing is protect. In simple terms, we're talking about protecting the running muscles. It's a very basic way of putting it, but effectively that's what we're trying to do. So we're pushing down using our glutes and our quads, just nice strong push down, and then almost recovering on the upstroke. Because imagine, well, you can again, this is something you can experiment with. You go out and start, as they teach you again, pulling along the bottom of the pedal stroke and pulling up the back. You're using your hamstrings, and you don't want to be using muscles that you're using when you're going to be running. You want to keep them as fresh and ready to run as possible. So we do get people to ride in a slightly different manner as well. And in conjunction with that, in order to train for that, we do a lot of power intervals where we do super low cadence work, where we'll go from a standing start and do, 30 pedal strokes from a standing start on a slight incline. And you kind of almost think about those sessions as being almost like going to the gym and doing your squats. So we don't do any strength and conditioning work for the bike. It's all done on the bike. So cycle functional kind of strength, so bike specific strength work. So I think we'll leave it there. But this is one we need to definitely run a separate workshop on, because it is new, and it's not new actually. It's just different to what a lot of people have heard. The classic advice is always go and spin your gears and get your heart rate up. If you're a pure cyclist, then fine. If you look at the Tour de France riders, the pro cyclists, they're spinning away, and it takes a long time to kind of get that skill, which is why athletes who talk about their, practicing to get up to 120 cadence and above, it takes time to practice that, and we don't need it, and we haven't got the time to do it. And most age groupers, in reality, aren't going to get there. But if you're a pro cyclist and you're riding for 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, then yeah, you probably will get there. But it's not needed in triathlon, in our opinion. So I hope that answers your question, Rich. I'll read.
Sarah's just added to that. Did you see Sarah's doing sprint distance racing now, a lot of which are draft legal. So she's asking whether that still applies in terms of low cadence or not, or less so.
Yeah. In simple terms, no, it's kind of different. Because you're doing sprints. If you kind of, it's the best way of explaining it really. If you had you imagine you've got no, I won't do it this way, it's going to complicate things. But if you need to hit high power numbers, then you can't do that on cadence alone. Sorry, you can't do that on strength alone. All right, unless you're Chris Hoy and you're on velodrome, and you've got legs like Chris Hoy, it's not going to happen. You do need to use the cadence as well. All right, so which you're going to be in a sprint try, you're going to be hitting really high power numbers. You need to use your cadence as well. But it doesn't mean, the best way of explaining it really, I guess, is you're going to be using the higher end of low cadence riding. That's probably the best way of riding. I wouldn't say that you suddenly start doing 120 cadence. I would still keep it in the 80-90 region, which would be high for low cadence riding. Hope that makes sense. But you do need to get that cadence up. And also, if you're doing draft legal, you're going to have to react to moves. You're going to be constant. It's more of a dynamic type of riding. You're going to be suddenly having to react to moves. You're going to have time on the front. You're going to be spinning your legs, and you need that cadence to be able to accelerate and respond to what's happening. So it's really important that you people get confused with this. They think sometimes, I've got to ride at 70 cadence when I'm doing a sprint try. It won't work. You need to be able to get the cadence up and have more flexibility. It's not as kind of linear as that. You need to be careful with how you use this. And I said to you, I kind of touched on it before. Middle distance, long distance, absolutely. And it gets a little bit more difficult as you get down to sprint and standards. You need to have a bit more flexibility in the cadence. Hope that kind of answers that. Did that answer that, Corinne, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think
good.
so.
Okay, all right. So you can see names on your end, Corinne. I could just see Facebook user on mine. That was Sarah, wasn't it?
Can't see. I can't see the Facebook. Because I didn't see the one from
you're looking at
Richard.
Aren't you? Okay.
Yeah. So I've got a different version to you.
Okay. We've got another comment here. By the way, your advice about 20 fast strokes, then settling down into a steady pace has worked for me. Yeah, so we put in our complete tangent here. We put in our open water training plans about getting in the water and getting on with it. So getting 20 fast strokes in, and that does a number of things. It kind of it gets your heart pumping. It gets you over that kind of initial "Christ, this water's cold" type thing, and so 20 fast strokes. By the time you've done 20 fast strokes, you will be off and moving. You'll start to your heart rate will start to rise a little bit, and you'll be over that kind of initial, almost like, I hesitate to say the word shock, because there is a cold water shock thing which you need to be careful of, but get you over that initial kind of, when your heart kind of goes, because it is a bit chilly. So get in the water and get yourself doing 20 fast strokes, and then settle down into the rhythm of your whatever session that you're doing. However, what I always say against that is, if you're a newbie, take your time. Because we don't want you to suddenly having a massive panic after 20 or after 15 strokes. So only really if you've kind of got a bit of experience, you know what you're doing with that, is my advice. Anything else on that, Corinne, before we see this is what's happening now? We've got loads of things coming in. We always end up filling an hour, don't we?
Yeah.
What else have we got?
There's one about motivation.
Okay. Do you want to do that one? Or do you want me to
Yeah.
do that one?
Andy? No, that's fine. So we've got, I can't put it up on the screen now. We've got,
I'll put it on the screen.
Don't go getting poorly now. You can't go getting poorly when we're just about to come out the other side. So we've got another question from Pat about struggling with motivation to train at the moment. Should I just go with it at the moment and just go out for a few easy runs, etc.? I think a lot of us are feeling that down for a while now, and at the start we might have thought,
you're completely breaking up. Can you hear me?
You made it a bit of a struggle really for some of us to keep motivated to train when we're not sure what we're aiming for. So I think you're right, Pat. I think just for now, just go out and enjoy doing exercise. If you haven't got races coming up, then and you don't feel like doing an interval session, go out and do a cross-country run and get the benefit of running on different terrain and having breaks for whatever, to look at scenery, to stop for stiles and gates and things like that. But try not to put pressure on yourself to hit numbers if you're struggling with motivation, just go and remember why you do this. Go and do it for fun, and enjoy what you're doing. That's more important at this stage than hitting numbers. And when you've got some races back in the diary, and you can then start thinking more about the kind of training you're doing, and doing more sort of race pace work and things like that.
Yep.
Got any more to add, Dave?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. I think a lot of people are really really struggling at the moment. I mean, it's a funny old world that we're in at the moment. So it's I said to quite a few people lately, just kind of go out there and take the pressure off yourselves a little bit. You can't be on it all the time. You know, when I say on it, I mean, you know, hitting the zones and hitting the training sessions exactly how they should be, and all the time. Because, you know, if we're not racing until flipping bloody, I don't know, May next year, you can't stay up for that long. It's just not possible. So take the foot off the gas, take the pressure off yourself. A lot of people say this all the time. A lot of people very often will just lose sight of what it is they're doing. In terms of, we do triathlon because we like running. We like, well, some people like some people like swimming, but most, you know, like biking and running. Most people tolerate swimming.
Or tolerate running, because I like cycling and swimming.
We've all got our favourite tolerances. So, you know, go out there and enjoy doing it for the sake of doing it. And it's still training. It's still, you know, largely aerobic work. And I think you said the other day, didn't you, Corin, about going out and going off-road and going across, you know, jumping across styes and all this kind of stuff, because it makes you slow down. It makes you kind of have a bit of a breather, makes you enjoy it, takes the pressure off. I used to love running off-road because you never looked at your pace afterwards, because you always knew it was going to be down, because you're jumping over stuff and, you know, getting chased by cows or whatever. So the pace becomes a little bit irrelevant. And once the pace becomes irrelevant, it really gives you the freedom to just kind of enjoy being out there. And it'll relight the fire a little bit. Have a rest. Have a proper rest as well. I mean, it's important. It's important every season. It's important to have regular rests, but certainly at the end of every season, even though we haven't had one this year, it's important to have a break, regroup, paint the garden fence, see your family, fix your marriage, whatever else, and then get back on with training again. You need to relight that fire. Yeah. Well,
the races are starting to come back again. So when they do, you'll be able to sort of reset those goals in terms of what you're training for. But for now, I think this is an opportunity to, like David says, regroup and relax, let your body recover a little bit, maybe from training quite hard, and then when you come back, you'll be even more motivated, because you want to get that fitness back that you had, but your body will then be recovered and ready for it. So like Dave said, you can't train hard 12 months a year. So, you know, if we're looking at races in September, October, and now is a good time to take your foot off a little bit, ready to go again when you've got 8-12 weeks to get back into sort of race fitness.
Yeah, all good. I think we're done, aren't we? Can we go home now?
I think so.
Don't have far to go home though, to be fair, I guess. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for today. So I hope you guys have found that useful. We're trying to do this every week, so send us some questions anytime. I mean, if you see this, if you watch this like after it's finished and it's not live, then just put a question on there, because it'll still find its way through to us, and we'll use it for next week, or tune back in again next week, next Tuesday at 3:00. So I think on that note, it's goodbye. Is it Morecambe and Wise that used to go goodbye from me and goodbye from her?
Yeah.
I feel like saying that at this point for some reason. Anyway,
goodbye from him and goodbye from her.
Yeah. So it's goodbye from me. Are you meant to say it's goodbye from?
And goodbye from me.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, there we go.
Goodbye from him. From him. Her. Him.
All right.
You.
Okay. Take care, guys.
See you next
Bye.
week.
See you next week.